much, Dr. Braha. Okay, so now it is my pleasure to introduce our first panel moderator, Michelle Gonzalez. She's a broker with Floridian First Realty, a boutique real estate firm in Coral Gables. This woman is a leader in the industry with over 2 decades of experience. This panel is going to be fantastic, really talk about the trajectory of Miami over the years. And I'd like to welcome her to the stage now.
All right, good morning, everyone. So first and foremost, my name is Michelle Gonzalez, and I will be moderating the Miami Boom and Bust panel. So like everything Miami, we're gonna make this a fun and vibrant conversation. So I wanted to ask our panelists to come on the stage, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves. Did they come? Are they here? So let's start with you, Jeff.
Hi guys, my name is Jeff Ardizon. I'm principal with the estate companies. We're locally based, real estate, vertically integrated firm. We focus on multifamily, horizontal development. We have about 5,000 units in the pipeline between Miami, Broward, and West Palm. Traditionally, we've been more on the opportunistic side where we entitle land, develop, stabilize, and sell to institutional investors. Now we've come out with a line that's more for long term, but as you see dislocations, we take opportunities and go from there. But yeah.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Some familiar faces out there. It's nice to see. Ali Khan Merali. I'm the president and chief financial officer of Turnberry Associates. Turnberry Associates is a large developer of commercial real estate, owner-operator, properties throughout South Florida and Tennessee. We have an array of assets that include the Seagate Hotel in Delray Beach, where we are the managing partner. We're the owner and curator of the Aventura Mall in Aventura, Florida, where we are working on a venture with Brightline to introduce a train station, and a joint venture with Belmont Senior Living to do a luxury senior living project. Working our way down, we're partners with the Lefrak family at Solomia, which is a 180-acre development with about 4,000 multifamily or residential units, 1 million square feet of planned commercial square footage, and we recently launched a condo project called One Park Tower. And then we are the joint venture partner with Terra Group at the Miami Beach Convention Center Hotel, where we're going to build an 800-room Grand Hyatt Hotel in partnership with the city of Miami Beach, and are working on some early work projects in Wynwood and Davie, Florida. So thrilled to be here and looking forward to a fun discussion.
Great. Thank you, Ali. Good morning, everyone. My name is Anthony Burns. I'm an owner and principal of the Plaza Equity Partners. We're a vertically integrated development company headquartered in Miami. We're also the managing partner of the Magic City Innovation District, which is an 8 million square foot development located just north of the Design District. We've been selected as one of the preliminary Brightline stops that will augment the 2,600 apartment units, 2 million square feet of commercial space, and about 500 hotel rooms. Glad to be here and look forward to the conference.
Good morning. I'm Veronica Cervera, Goeseke. I want to thank the university for having us here. I think one of the most important things in a city for its growth and its future is its university and educating our young. So thank you for having us here. I'm the CEO of Cervera Real Estate. In the late 1960s, my mother, Alicia, had the idea that Miami would go vertical and that she would create a business to handle these vertical developments. So given the fact that she said, I grew up in a house where my father was an intellectual and ambassador, but then I married a Cuban when my father was sent as ambassador to Cuba, and I sat around at those sugar mill conversations where the only thing that family talked about was money, which was not an acceptable conversation in my home. And I listened and I learned. And a few years later, I really needed that education. So she arrived to Miami, threw on her best suit that she had brought in from Cuba, called the Kai's company, which is still a friend, Stanton Smith, and said, there's this piece of property for sale. And she and my dad put everything together there. They bought it for nothing. And it was the first piece of real estate that got zoned high-rise. From there came a real estate company, a lot of hard work on both of them. We're on the third generation, and it's my daughter, Alexandra, who's involved, who volunteered me today. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to a nice conversation with everyone.
Good morning, my name's Still Hunter. Are both of these on? So maybe I'll give this back to you. Oops. My name's Still Hunter, and I'm a managing director with Walker & Dunlop here in South Florida. I lead the South Florida multifamily investment sales team. I've been in the business for 23 years, and throughout the course of the past 23 years, along with my team, I've sold about 95,000 apartments and totaling about $15 billion. Anyway, thrilled to be here, and like you said, looking forward to a lively discussion.
Well, thank you, guys. So like I said, I'm Michelle Gonzalez. I did my undergrad here. I did my master's here. So there's nothing more. I couldn't be more happy than being here today, sitting on the stage with this group and the group on, you guys here, the students, everyone in the real estate field. So thank you guys for being here. And Dr. Baraha, Dr. Harden, the FIU staff as well. So now that we are going to talk about Miami, boom and bust city. Why do you think Miami has been referred to as a boom and bust city? So this is going to be open. You guys don't have to raise your hand. You have your mic and you can answer.
I would say because traditionally it has been a boom and bust city. I mean, if you look back on the history of Miami and really thinking in terms of the real estate cycles, going all the way back to the 1920s with the land boom, Miami real estate demand in the past, and I think this has changed today, but in the past it's really been driven by external factors, some of them fleeting and some of them enduring. The enduring factors were generally innovations. So in the 20s, it was the advent of the railroad, which provided access to South Florida really for the first time to a broad audience, led to a land boom. But ultimately, demand changed. There wasn't the economic base here to support the values, so it crashed. Fast forward to the 1950s and 1960s, and you had the interstate highways as well as air conditioning. So again, South Florida became accessible to a much broader audience, and living here became much more pleasant, and that you could escape the heat in your air-conditioned home. And then fast forward to the 70s with the prevalence of the condominium form of ownership, again making South Florida more accessible by way of a more affordable price point that allowed people to have homes and second homes here. And then the fleeting factors, all of those factors, still drive demand today. They still have access by way of the interstate highway, all the different things. The more fleeting factors were demand driven by generally Latin American crises, where you'd have an issue in a Latin American country that created a surge of demand in South Florida with people fleeing their homes to Miami and flight capital coming to Miami. That surge of demand would lead to a run-up in values and probably some speculative development. And then as soon as the crisis abated or the flight capital was fully invested, the demand turned off and it led to a boom. So that is why I would say Miami has been considered a boom and bust city. It's just been a lot of cycles. But today, and I'm sure we'll get into this more on the panel, it's an entirely different story. We have a robust and sufficiently diversified local economic base to support long-term steady growth.
I'd add just a kind of a corollary to that, and my background's primarily in the residential space, and I've been here since 2009. And there's almost a micro dynamic within everything that he just said of the high season, the low season, right? So back in, not even that long ago, as condo developers, you'd really look forward to the high season, right? That's when you'd get 85, 90% of your sales, and then you'd have to plan for the low season and the off period. And we've seen that dynamic somewhat dissipate. It still exists, but it also further, I guess, entrenches that dynamic of the swings where you, rather than having a steady market, you have this snowbird / seasonality to the market.
I think of Miami when you say boom and bust, which was an interesting phrase. I think it's the bust in other cities and in other countries and in other economies that really provide the boom in our city. So that's the way I think. The bust somewhere else creates the boom here. And of course, as world economies do have shifts, because that's it. We have better times. We have some times that are not so interesting. But it's the bust and the other places that have grown Miami. And it's also the times that are difficult that somehow Miami seems to come out of those difficult times a lot faster than other parts in the country. So we're a wonderful city. We're a city where, before inclusion got to be such a popular word, Miami was about inclusion. So the bust, whether it was in Cuba or whether it was in other countries or whether it's more recently in New York and in Chicago, has created and added to our boom.
I think I'd love to build on that. I agree. We operate assets in a lot of different cities, and touching on something you're saying, Miami is a great place to do business, but exposure in this last cycle to cities like San Francisco or Seattle or Portland, where people would 5 years ago thrive to be in those cities and strive to be there and say this is a great quality of life, and now there's issues with crime, there's political issues, there's labor issues, there's tax issues, or there's separation of wealthy and non. I think when you think of Miami, and as people have been, we talked a little bit about secular trends, and I'm sure we'll touch on that later, but when you think of Miami, there's a lot of permanence in this next movement. There's a lot of ability for people to perform, to work, to live here with success. And like every city, like every area that's grown rapidly, there's going to be some growing pains, but the horizon is quite limitless. And I think looking at the history of boom and bust, but we laughed. The notion of bust today, you're right, it's happening in a lot of cities, but hard to believe that it would happen relatively in this city.
I mean, I think if you kind of look at it overall, and history shows that, every city like Miami has its boom and bust, and every bust creates opportunities where we develop other larger projects, opportunities where we can get a little bit more creative, and they're during times that, for example, during COVID, where there's some dislocations within the market, but it happens nationwide. And everyone always says, well, can we do anything else in Miami? There's nothing left. Let's go up to Broward and West Palm. And that shows you where we've come to today, right? Like the barriers to entry in Miami right now are extremely high. So long term, when you're looking at the migration, the net migration that's coming in and out, as we study the demographics of our tenants in our communities, I can tell you probably between 55 to 65% of our tenants, at least in the core area, have been outside relocations coming in, and I think we're kind of in, which we're going to talk about it a little bit more, but I think we're in the first or second inning of this happening. A lot of people said it's slowed down, but there are a lot of companies that are moving down. And again, that just goes into how we're maturing as a city. You look 20 years ago, you looked at Brickell, it looked a lot different than it does today. It's become a financial hub, and it's been through the cycles that's allowed us to kind of get there. And because of certain, crises, I guess when you call COVID, it allowed people the opportunity to say, hey, I'm going to go try out Florida, right? And they had it in their mind, but that was the time to get it going. That gave them the gas to come here during those times. So, you always have those troughs and those waves, and I think overall I agree with what everybody said here in terms of the growth that we're having.
Okay. So would you say that Miami's booming economy is grounded in tourism, or maybe you can compare the tourism or the migration into Miami with now being known as more of a financial hub? So what do you think?
I mean, I think it just overall, even Florida itself, it's very tax-friendly. You have high regulatory environments in the southeast region, in the West Coast, and quite frankly, nothing that's not, it's definitely not a political statement, but when you look at where we study the migration, where our people are coming from, and they're from high tax jurisdictions, they are coming from areas where they feel that they're crime coming from Chicago, everything that got heightened during the market up in, during COVID up in the Northeast has definitely attributed to people coming down. But it's a friendly city. Miami's made up of, and I think the resilience comes from it, and historically has been because we dominate the small businesses. Small businesses are 99% of our economy. And we have a lot of entrepreneurs in Miami. There's a lot of great synergies. There's a lot of capital coming here because of our creativity, and I think that's why you're going to see, you're seeing more growth in tech. And what better place not to live, right? And then you have the international influence that we have here. So it's extremely diverse, and the potential, when you look at all the factors, I think really benefit and make it extremely attractive to come down here. Now we just got to keep improving on education, and why Miami wasn't where it is today as we're improving as to other major cities has been education. That's where we got to improve, because we hire all these companies, you hire people, and they go where you hire good talent. And I think we're starting to see that here. So overall, I think we're definitely getting there, and it's just, obviously everything takes time, but I think we're right there.
Does anyone want to chime in on that, or do?
Well, I think one of the fortunate things about Miami as a city is that we were never a heavy industry city. So we never had all these factories that polluted our city. We never had all these factories where the jobs got transferred overseas. So I think that's always been very favorable for our economy. So tourism is fantastic. I see it as a big plus to our city. I think we're all ambassadors to our very young city. But the financial industry is sort of like the tourism industry. It's sort of a clean industry. It's a service industry. Because given all the options, you are going to do business and financial transactions with people that you like. You want to be where they are. Our grandparents, at least my grandparents, because everybody else is younger, but my grandparents went to New York to do their businesses. And while they were there, the grandmothers bought everybody's wedding dress and all the party dresses. Well, somehow it has changed. And they went to their doctors in New York. In my own generation, they sort of did both things. They did some banking there, they saw some doctors. But I see in my daughter's generation that they do their banking in Miami, the mothers buy the wedding dresses in Miami, and so much more healthcare options, because to have a strong city, you also have to have a good place for healthcare. And those are the things that I talk about when I go about talking about real estate. I talk to people often about all the things that Miami is that we don't get enough credit for. Great healthcare, to wonderful universities. How many cities can boast of 2 medical schools, 2 engineering schools, 2 law schools? So this is the message that I send out to people, because these are the things that build great cities.
Mm-hmm. And I think all of these things that we've all touched on are part of what has, converted Miami. It's all a big part of the evolution of Miami from what was historically more of a tourism and service-based economy, and then it's long been acknowledged as a financial center, the financial hub, especially for Latin America, and then recently over maybe the past decade, but really accelerating recently post-COVID with all these various different corporate relocations that are happening in South Florida, where you've gone from the bulk of the migration into South Florida being children and retirees to literally leaders of industry, not just moving to South Florida, but bringing their companies in tow with them. There's so many high-profile recent examples: Ken Griffin with Citadel, Barry Sternlicht with Starwood, Sam Bankman with FTX, many others, where they're coming to South Florida and they're creating a more diversified economy where it's not just tourism, service, finance. Also the healthcare industry that you mentioned is robust and growing, and now more and more technology, and the expansion of higher education in South Florida has been huge. FIU now being acknowledged as, I believe, the #2 international business school in the country. That'll help to continue to fuel those relocations to South Florida, because like what was mentioned in the past, we've kind of lacked the local educated workforce that companies are looking for when they're considering where to keep their headquarters.
I'd echo that. We operate all of our assets, so we've got 3,000 plus employees, and I'll say this recent trend has allowed us to really recruit and capture some really talented people. And I think in years past, it may have been more difficult to convince somebody to come out of New York or even LA and say,
Yep.
let's move to Miami and do something here. But the team we built over the last 24 months alone has been surprising to us, and it's been wonderful. But even then, our partners and their interactions, you walk into meetings and you feel the energy, you feel the ability and the institutional knowledge coming. So that'll bring great things as well, because that leads the way. And so the trend is started. It's only a matter of time.
So every point that everyone said, education, taxation, the migration into Miami, regarding the macro, national, and international economy impacting South Florida, what factors do you think deserves the most attention?
I think one of the things that plays into the success of Miami, certainly historically, and will be one of the key benchmarks of whether we continue to be successful, is having local and regional government that actually works, right? So not even looking at a political level, but just simply the function of government, right, is to make our lives easier and better, and is like a lubricant of society. And that's why you're seeing this influx from a lot of these other cities, is because they're in many ways, the municipal governments are not working. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that, whether it's taxation, politics, what have you. Miami and Florida generally had a government that I think worked relatively well through COVID, and under the leadership of Mayor Suarez has really, embraced a government that is open and works for people, right? So it starts from us on the development side being able to go and actually get things permitted and built efficiently so we can create housing stock for people to live in. It has to do with roadways that work. It has to do with something I think Miami needs to really focus on, obviously education, but some type of mass transit. The Bright Line Northeast commuter line is something that Miami-Dade is currently working with the federal government on. That needs to be an absolute priority of the county administration to get that done, because those are, again, the things that allow our government and our society down here to actually work and progress efficiently.
Well, I think Miami has had two mayors that have really been so influential in our city. Back in the late 1960s and the 70s, we had Maurice Ferre and his wife, he was the then mayor. They had a beautiful home on the shores of Brickell Avenue. And Maurice Ferre decided that this was going to be an international city. And as a small child, I saw them entertain and invite everyone and really dedicate himself that he was going to globally visit and globally tell people that this was a city of importance. So that I think we can thank that Maurice and his efforts for having been the first one to kind of introduce Miami as an international important city. And now we've got a young mayor who's wonderful. Suarez is actually, he's great with media. He does all these things that, all the young people listen to that I wish I'd listened to more and understood more. But he's actually invited people to come to Miami in a modern way. Where Maurice had the dinner parties at his house, the mayor has now a modern way of reaching out. He's done a great job. So I do think that when you look at why cities fail or why countries fail, a big proponent is their government. If your government is not a positive partner in your business, you're not going to do well. They're just too big to fight. So Florida is very friendly. We have a government that says, how can I be a positive partner in your business?
It's interesting, too, because I think what you described with the mayor from the 70s and then Francis Suarez today is kind of emblematic of the evolution of Miami and the diversification of the economy, because it went from the mayor in the 70s focused on entertainment, whereas Francis Suarez today is focused on business.
Yeah, and I think overall, when you see a healthy economy, right, it translates to less crime. There's a lot of economic factors that translate from actually having a friendly environment, and when you look at what was happening kind of in the last 2 or 3 years, we've benefited a ton from this, because not only, if you talk historically, the crime in Miami at some points it was very volatile, But I think overall, a successful economy equates to a healthier economy in terms of crime, in terms of people wanting to come. Education gets better. So just there's so many things that get better from having this friendly environment. And Veronica, I think you brought up probably the best point, and it's just having that friendly government and leadership is what we need, and is what brought people over. Is bringing people over to us. So, yeah, I agree.
I wanted to touch on Anthony's point regarding the infrastructure and how important it is, right? So planes, trains, automobiles, and walkability. Let's talk transportation, and kind of to follow up on still, in 1984, the Metro Rail opened. 1989, the Tri-Rail connected the Tri-County area. 2018, Brightline excelled connectivity. 2021, we welcomed the Underline. The Port of Miami, the Port Everglades, Miami International, Fort Lauderdale International, they're always vying for top port, top airport. So what's the capacity of our growing transportation to accommodate year-over-year population increases?
I think the thing that jumps off when you read those dates, for 30 years,
Real gap.
right, from 89 to 18, I don't think anything substantially happened on the public transportation side. That is a total failure, right? And now I think we have an opportunity, and again, I'll come back to this Northeast Corridor route that'll, essentially is the local that goes from Miami Central all the way up to Aventura, that will link that entire area. That has to go through, right? It's for Miami to continue to, pound on its chest and say we're going to be a global city that works, and we can get away from some of the, the congestion, the automobile traffic that, I live up in, I work in Miami, but I live in Broward County, and I mean, the traffic is unbearable. And as we continue to add population, which I think everyone hopes that will continue to happen, there have to be these release valves, and that's certainly the low-hanging fruit that we can do in the next 10 years, is to get that operational, and there's a path, and it just takes the political will. There's certainly the funds available, I think, at the federal level to make a lot of that happen, but that's, I think, one of the keys to our success.
But you have to do it also in terms of when you're improving transit, to have a healthy transit, corridor, or when you're providing that type of transportation, you need density, right? So we're creating density. We didn't have this density back in the 80s and the 90s to create a robust transportation system, although you could do it kind of like in areas that were already, where we saw the Metro Rail, it was done in downtown Miami. Now we have extended it all the way down south and connecting cities. But before we connect cities, we got to connect our city. And our city has to be very friendly in terms of going vertical along these corridors. And I think obviously now we're getting there as home ownership obviously is extremely hard now, especially if you're coming out of college, making $60,000, $70,000 a year. You can't buy a home. It's just right now it's not possible. And because of the lack of supply of land, that makes us go vertical. So I think as you're going to see that with time, and I know it doesn't go directly with your question, just speaking more about now, I think we will start seeing more of a wave kind of in that transportation area. And look, the government gives waivers on parking waivers. We're not there yet, so we're kind of like in this transition period that, listen, everyone that lives in our buildings, they drive. They need cars. We need parking spaces. In fact, if we do not provide them parking spaces, then we have to give concessions, right? Because more people still drive. So although they're trying to give you less parking requirements as a way to create density in your buildings, it's a very fine line. And I think, still we work on that together, sometimes when we're looking at assets. But that's it's been a struggle, but it's part of the growth of Miami. And I think, over the next 10, 15 years, I also agree with what you're saying. But I think we're getting there.
Yeah, I think that as everybody has said, there are several key pieces. One is the build out of the infrastructure for public transit. Two is sufficient density to make it work. And another key piece is going to be adoption. I think South Floridians in general are not accustomed to using public transit, but I think what's going to most likely to drive adoption is necessity. It's just getting to the point now where you just have to have it. It took me over 2 hours yesterday to get from Fort Lauderdale to Miami. And as a matter of practice, anytime I'm doing that 30-minute drive, I allow an hour and a half. Wind up spending a lot of time in my car working once I arrive where I'm supposed to be. But I think we're on the right path, and the expansion of the Bright Line, building in connectivity with the Tri-Rail, and then also everybody at the local level pushing the initiatives and understanding the necessity of it in order to continue our growth will be key to making that happen.
So Miami's mix of ethnicity and culture is globalized as a first-tier gateway city, with increasing office market rents and a maturing corporate hub. Based on these, how do you reflect on Miami's diversity attracting talent? I know some of you have mentioned that, so we're going to circle back.
Well, diversity is something that Miami didn't have to teach itself, because Miami was built on diversity. When my family came here 60 years ago, we found such a welcoming American community to us. I remember getting on an airplane in Havana, and these big guys maybe they were small, they were big to me, with all these guns, and landing in Miami with my 3-year-old sister. Okay, first class Pan American. That was the last time we did first class for many, many years. And we arrived in the United States, and I had a letter that I knew I had to give. Our nanny was waiting for us at the airport, and my grandparents. My father gave, in 1960, custody of his 2 daughters to the black nanny. Talk about a different Miami. She couldn't even use the same restroom with us. But this Miami, peacefully, for the most part, every city has its moments, every city has its small riots or big riots, but Miami pretty much peacefully became a city where diversity was just part of who we are. And if you came to Miami, you were able to join a board, you were able to join a club, you were able to do your business, probably a lot easier than if you went to Boston, which was a city that was very, very old. Miami was a young, young city. So part of Miami has always been inclusion. And maybe if you grew up somewhere else, you would see how inclusive we are. When I went to California, and I sat down at a Four Seasons, and the waiter told me he couldn't speak Spanish to me. And I was speaking Spanish to him because I realized his English was very limited. I said, what is going on in this state? So I think that part of the reason that we do so well is because we're a very inclusive city. I think we have to work on our education a tremendous amount in order to educate all pockets of our population. But I don't think anyone does inclusion better than we do.
Okay, so let's see. Miami's known as the Magic City, the Riviera of the United States, Silicon Beach, Wall Street of the South. Do we embrace these names, or do we not? How do we concrete our foot and stamp our foot and say, Miami is Miami, it's its own city?
I think that's the appeal of Miami. The continuing to embrace the view of Miami as the Magic City or the Riviera of the South, or the various different names it's had over the years that really are kind of reflective of the lifestyle here. I think it's very important that we continue to embrace those things, because that's what makes Miami so special and unique. And then having that along with the stable economic base is really going to continue to drive growth.
I think it's become a lot more achievable too, and it's interesting you talked about adoption on the transit, and I think this influx of others from Northeast and other states will help that adoption, because they're used to public transit and they're used to not owning cars. And the first conversation I had a few months ago with a friend of mine who said, we were a one-car family now, and people in Miami, I think, generally didn't think like that. And so, but speaking of the names, I think everybody connects with Miami in their own way. You can be in different cities and talk to different people. Where do you live? Oh, I live in Miami. Oh, I love Miami, but I love this restaurant, or I love this hotel, or I've got these friends, or my family's over here. And I think that accessibility and the connection with these names does a lot to drive people into the city and make it feel approachable and appealing. I think 10 years ago, people were like, I could never live in Miami. They didn't even think about that.
Sure.
But today, people are saying, oh, I rented a place there for 6 months because I work remote sometimes, and I have a condo here or a condo there, and I think it really facilitates it.
Yeah, we've done a good job of, I think that's a great point, of making destinations within the city. So now if you go visit Miami, now there are people talking about different places that we actually go visit, different things that we can do, either whether you're a tourist, whether you're visiting a friend, or whether you live there for a couple years. I do think in terms of you know, a lot of people, we talk about the migration that's coming in, but there's also, if you looked at, you know, in the past couple years, there was a net migration out. And here's what was happening was that people were looking for value. And where do you go for value? You drive till you qualify, right? So you go to Broward, now we went to West Palm. And I think we see West Palm and Broward are they're the beneficiaries of the growth of Miami, right? Because we can't provide what we were able to provide before, which has let some people out. So we got to also focus on being able to provide product that's attainable for the folks that are priced out of this market, whether that's rentals, whether that's the, you know, just a home ownership. A lot of times, I'm not a big fan of big government, but there's also ways that we can get incentivized by the local governments to provide developments that are friendly enough so that we can provide those folks that are priced out and looking for attainable rents and looking to, I mean, they're service industry employees. They are why we are here. I mean, we touched about Miami being a service industry, and we need them. So we also got to, we got to really focus on that end in terms to continue this growth and continue the growth of local companies and what we're trying to achieve long term.
Which is a great segue. One of my questions was mega developments. Miami has seen for forever, right? From Veronica, like she said, on her first vertical project to what we're seeing now, vertical and horizontal projects. So can you explain your position on the importance of mega developments to the past, present, and future of Miami?
I'll take this. We currently have, which may be the largest development project within, you know, the four corners of Miami today, the Magic City Innovation District. You know, we see these large projects as really catalysts for the entire city. They create a high density impact in the local area where they are, but they also have these spillover effects into the entire neighborhoods because they have that center of gravity of job creation, development, infrastructure improvements. So for example, in the area that we're developing in, you know, there hadn't been any meaningful infrastructure developments there in 50 years. I mean, it's just completely neglected from an infrastructure standpoint. Part of what, you know, the challenges we're going through and working through is how do you update, you know, antiquated force mains and water lines and all of this, not just where we are, but on the lift stations and all of that stuff, again, that gets to this whole point of making Miami a good governance city that works for, you know, all these different neighborhoods. And as we continue to move forward as a city, that we can't neglect some of these other neighborhoods that have been left out of the more ritzy development areas that have received all of the, you know, the utility dollars, the infrastructure dollars, et cetera. And that in a way will help mitigate some of the, you know, I think you see these areas that are cost prohibitive. We're looking to create these pockets within the city that are still attainable for the workforce and the folks that are doing a lot of the jobs that make the city function.
You know, I support that completely. We talk a lot about placemaking and building with principles and integrating with the community. So at Solomia, which is you know, that 180-acre project in North Miami, but we focus on academics. University of Miami just launched an outpatient medical facility there. We've been building roads. We're providing international restaurants, athletic communities. And, you know, there's not an immediate return on investment when you do these things, but there is a return on the community, which in turn will be beneficial to everybody. We're talking to FIU a lot because that's the North Campus that's on our side there, and we're trying to integrate the North Campus within our community. And so this was, you know, it's funny, as we were talking, when we first met 10, 12 years ago, that you had already worked on this project, and folks who are down the street on this project, so it's touched a lot of folks. But to take what we're finding is a lot of young families, a lot of communities that are working north or south and need a place that they can live, work, and play at are drawn to this, but we're trying to do so in a manner that is achievable and accessible. And I think you see the community around it flourish as a result. The restaurants are busy, the stores are busy, the residential condos are leasing very well. But all of this is a vision, and somebody has to take risk, and you have to have good partners and good community support from all sides of it. And so it's well worth it in the long run, but it's something that in the initial stages is definitely, you know, a stretch and somewhat visionary to get things moving on.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, we don't have any mega developments, but I like to build around your mega developments because we benefit greatly about it. But what I can tell you is that there's people, you can't really appreciate the hard work that kind of goes into something like this that you guys are developing. And because you're pioneering over the long term of the vision of having something 15, 20 years down the road of where we're going to get to. Because you're not making money in the initial 5, 6, 7 years, right? The way that Midtown, the way that Wynwood came about, I mean, you took risk. And that takes a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of infrastructure. It takes a lot of working with the municipalities and the governments and trying to time that, whether you own the land, whether you don't own the land. And it's very, very difficult in the beginning, but will be extremely rewarding. You know, and you know, obviously, we're developing right next to Solomia, not right next to it, just north of it, and you proved that the rents can be achieved there in North Miami, and that's why we are building another 1,000 units right there on 163rd, right? And you know, but for the most part, I mean, if you look at a major project like that, talk about risk of how many gallons is that pool?
Far more than we like to.
How many gallons? Just tell everybody. Do you know?
I can tell you how much we pay for it every
Yeah.
year. But you know, the interesting part of Solomia, the vision is Richard Lefrak and the Lefrak family, who are New Yorkers, saw this in South Florida and came and took the initial stages to bring this project to life, and then said, we need a local partner, and that's where the Sofer family got involved. And it's similar. If you look at this panel, some of us have migrated to Florida. We're talking about Boston. I was in New York and from Vancouver on the West Coast, and so it's interesting that the influx of individuals coming from various other locations are bringing visions and commitments and saying, I'll look at a 20-year project in Miami, because this isn't a 2-year project. Your project isn't an 18-month project. You're long-term. But it's interesting that it's outside energy and outside capital that are committing to this city and saying, I believe in this, and let's go 20 years, let's go 30 years, which I think is great for the credibility of Miami and South Florida.
I think that's a great point in terms of the appeal of mega developments to developers from other areas from around the world. You know, it brings in diversity of design, diversity of vision, and from the outside looking in, from my standpoint, you know, hoping to sell components of mega developments, but that's the only involvement. It's shocking or almost hard to wrap my head around the vision required and the capital outlay over a long period of time before you're expecting to see any real return on it required. But the ultimate reward seems to be huge based on what I know of the Lefraks and what they did in New York and New Jersey, building out just massive mega developments. And then to Jeff's point, you know, the impact it has on the surrounding area, you know, where you're looking to develop, you know, ancillary sites, the overall impact on the community is huge, because it takes something that would probably happen over 50 years if it were to happen organically, and accelerates that growth and development over maybe, I don't know, a decade. So it has incredible impacts on the areas where the developments are, the community as a whole, and creates opportunities for others.
Yeah, and if you think about kind of like the cycles you go through mega projects, right? Like, you're going to start something. Look what we're going through now, where our debt markets are at. You know, where institutions are and have pencils down, And banks, unless you have track records, are not doing anything with you right now in terms of the uncertainty that we're seeing in the market and where we think things are headed. But having a mega project going through something like that takes its bumps and things delay with time. And so my gratitude goes out to what you guys have done. You guys have done an amazing job. But it definitely takes a different mindset. And I think one of the great things you guys did was put that huge pool that looks like the ocean. But it's a destination, and it attracts people.
Jeff's projects are great as well.
Yeah.
Right? So every one of you, Veronica, I definitely, and I think the audience wants to hear about your experience from Brickell to what it was to what it is today.
60 years ago, when I refer to when my family arrived here, Miami was really a city of single-family homes. If you went on Brickell Avenue, and you're of my generation, you went to all these beautiful houses on the water. That's where they were. And when you went to other parts of the city where we now have a lot of development, they were single-family homes. Because of our boundaries, which is basically the ocean and the Everglades, we stretch along the coast. But what happens is the city matured and different people came into the city often from larger cities. They brought in their vision. The first big building that was done on Brickell in our first account was Harry Helmsley. He came in, and in the school that was an all-girls school where I used to, jump into the bay, he bought it from the Catholic Church and built this big building and said to my mother, you need this job, so I'm going to give it to you. And there was the first building that was really luxury from a New Yorker. He saw the vision that Miami was going to need this big building. And then as Miami has grown and all this input from major cities, and of course a lot of our homegrown talent, what Miami does and continues to do is respond to its needs. So mega development is a response to a need. They have them everywhere else, and we responsibly and collectively respond to our needs, I really think, better than anywhere else. So when that plane lands in Miami, when I come from all these other cities, and when I'm sitting in the Riviera, I'm sitting in Monte Carlo, I'm sitting that, and I have a very good ear, and I'm hearing the people next to me talking about Miami, I'm thinking, the Riviera was a great brand, but today, is there a better brand than Miami? I don't think so. I think we've got the best brand in the world.
I agree. I definitely agree.
100%.
So my next question is, between one big city and another big city, the next boom is in the middle, strategically or not. So looking forward, what city or what part of Dade County do you see in the growth?
I think the growth is going to be helped by where we put great schools. Because does this work? If the growth of Doral happened, I think one of the reasons it happened is because it has great schools. So if we want to grow areas, let's concentrate on putting great schools. And I think the Archdiocese of Miami, with all these parochial schools who, educated so many people in my generation, have done an outstanding job. But if there's one thing we need to focus on in our city, is putting good schools in areas, all areas, putting good schools. And if we want to develop and we want a neighborhood to be positive, let's put in a great school. And let's put in a school also that doesn't close up at 3 o'clock. Why shouldn't these great schools that we spend so much money on be places that could be aftercare programs? If we take care of our children, we're going to have even a better city.
Yeah, and then you guys, going to that, you got to take care of your teachers too, who are definitely underpaid. When you look at other municipalities and the education that they have in other places, and focus on that, because that does bring in, I think that does change the dynamics of where we're trying to start up. But to answer your question, I think also along the Biscayne corridor, going to just south North Miami, going to Edgewater, as you kind of trickle north on the bay side, I think you can see continued growth on that end. I also think you can see a lot of growth, which you're already seeing a lot of growth in Homestead. So depending what market we're talking about, so secondary markets like Homestead, whether it's on the industrial side, finding industrial space now is almost nearly impossible. And with the growth that we're having in South Florida, you saw Amazon going down to Homestead, the Speedway. There's a lot of growth heading down to Florida City. just there's different classes of housing, right? But I do think that we're shifting over to that route to find value for people to live in and have an attainable product that they can actually afford for most of the people that do live in Miami. And then I think you trickle up north. You know, Doral was a great place. Hialeah, I think Hialeah is turning more into an institutional market as people see that why can I live in Hialeah? The same thing as Doral. We personally have a project on 103rd, and we've had the highest velocities. We originally thought we converted a Ramada in that we bought it during COVID. We converted into 250 studios. And the mayor was, you know, when we went to go talk to the mayor about it, we said, hey, look, this is what we're planning on doing. He was like, oh, you're crazy. I said, oh, I'm not crazy, because everything that's in Hialeah, you have studios. They're just all illegal. And I'm just going to provide it to you, amenitized, and provide it the same as I do on the other side, which is on the Class A product. But I think you're seeing, and what we're seeing is, and we thought we were going to get more folks that were coming from Hialeah and give them that option to have that amenitized product. But we're actually seeing the reverse, which is education to us, is that we're seeing as the valley to Doral or to Miami Lakes. And as you kind of see these sub-markets kind of mature, you're starting to see different pockets, you know, take off with time. So.
I have a question. What are the ages of the population moving into that hotel conversion?
So it's okay. So there's more single. Either you're single or you're older. A lot of folks now, especially, are in the transitional phase where they can't afford a home. So they're needing to rent something that's more temporary. So you're seeing more families go into these developments, whether it's studios or whether they're 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms. Demographics in the rental communities, you know, your average household income is substantially higher than it was 2 or 3 years ago, because it's those that are renting because they can't find a home right now and you know, just get completely priced out and have the cash to do it. And you know, I think kind of the bread and butter, right, between 34, 35, 36, but you do have increase in households where we're seeing like what works a 3-bedroom doesn't work the same in Hialeah as it does in downtown, right? Downtown is, you know, we think of it as more as 1, 2 bedrooms, a little bit smaller units can work there. That doesn't mean that it works in Hialeah. The more folks are in one unit, but we also have those that are looking for something that's attainable. And having a price point of $1,600 per month as opposed to $2,400 is a car payment. So, and people are changing the way they live. You know, I think, you know, if you look at, are they willing to sacrifice 200 square feet in exchange to pay $300 less? The answer is yes. There's a sensitivity in this market on price point. And that's what we tried to capture in Hialeah. Yeah.
Did anyone else want to talk about the next city or the next neighborhood in Miami that they feel is going to be booming?
It's hard to predict. There's so many different areas of South Florida that are currently booming and growing. You know, I think that the market as a whole is really, really taking off and growing.
Yeah.
Okay. So combined on this stage, there's over 150 years of real estate experience. I'm hoping that everyone's learned a few things here and there. But I do want to ask, why is Miami not a boom and bust city, right? We asked why people think it was in the beginning, and then we've touched on a lot of different topics. Why do you think Miami should not be considered or is just not a boom and bust city?
It just isn't a boom and bust city anymore. Really, for you know, kind of thinking back on what I said at the beginning, the lack of really robust local economic base was what caused the bust periods, because there wasn't local demand. It relied on external factors. That's completely changed now. Our team is a part of our market research, we track corporate relocations and expansions. And over the past 3 years, there have been, I believe it's 122 relocations and expansions into Miami, of which 84 are new to market, companies that were never here before. 26 of those were full relocations from another city, such as Citadel, into Miami. And so those 122 relocations, if you do the math, they represent literally tens of thousands of jobs. And based on the space needs that we research for every company, that's 4 million square feet of office demand. That's a big part of why Miami right now is probably one of the only places in the country with a pretty robust office pipeline and rising office rents. And it's all reflective of what's happened in Miami with the diversification of the economic base, the growth of the local economy. These companies are bringing, high wage, high quality, white collar employment to the city. And, we've talked a lot about attracting talent, but I think talent retention is also a key piece to the maturation and growth and stability going forward of Miami. And in the past, if you wanted the type of employment that these companies have brought to South Florida, a graduate at FIU might be looking to relocate to another city. That's no longer the case. There's so many good and growing and better job opportunities now in South Florida, which will allow us to continue to retain the talent, which again is more demand here, local and homegrown. So I think that the fact that we have the economic base to generate sufficient demand to support the market consistently and steadily is the key to why we're no longer a boom and bust city.
There's a lot of equity in the real estate that has been bought. If you look at those buildings in Brickell Avenue and you look at the buildings throughout the city and especially in the luxury, there's a tremendous amount of equity, very little debt. I think we have probably one of the highest equity to debt rates than any other city because a lot of the cultures that have come in here like to put a lot of money into the places that they call home. So I think that's very important when we look at the city. Another thing I think is wonderful about our city is that our young people come back to Miami. They may go away and they get educated at all these international cities, which we are now an international city. They go to New York, they go to Geneva, they go to London, they go to all these things. And then all of a sudden they all come home. As my son said, I'll never live in Miami. I'm living in London or Geneva. And now he says, I'm never leaving Miami. And I find that among all these kids who have studied abroad, have no problem about hopping into a plane, but where they want to live, where they want to raise their children, and is Miami. And you'd be surprised when you visit, I'm sure all of us, other cities where the people tell you, the young people, when they leave, they don't come back.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think it's as black and white as we're a boom and bust city or we're not a boom and bust city. There will be tough times ahead, and I think people need to, and especially as not to beat a dead horse, but it's through good governance is really the basis of this, and it's not our divine right that Miami now we've reached a new threshold and it's just blue skies ahead. We have to be mindful of what got us here and continue to have that smart growth and smart development strategy and smart governance to keep the train rolling. I mean, look, no one would necessarily consider New York a boom and bust city, but they still have hard times, and they get there. When we look back, why hard times hit cities, it's pretty self-evident, right? There are things that they consciously did that led them down that path, and we just have to be thoughtful about that and not let Miami necessarily follow those paths going forward.
Yeah, it's hard to grow a city when there's rent control, right? So, there's that, having that, and I agree with you, and you got to have that friendly environment, in other words, to have some growth. I don't know that, the way I look at boom and bust is just cycles, right? Cycles in terms of did we do things right all the time? No. Did we fix things along the way? Yes, and there's definitely going to be hard times coming. And, as we look at what we're going through now, there was just different crises. Now we have more liquidity in the market. We didn't have that back in 2008, in 2009. And that's attributing to reason why we keep increasing interest rates and why things are moving slowly, probably because there's a lot more liquidity here. There's a lot more flight capital that's coming down from internationally. And, you know, Miami, and I kind of look at it this way, and I think still, you know, you can talk about that too, but institutional capital is coming more and more all the time. Institutional allocations are increasing over time right now, and have skyrocketed the past 3 or 4 years because of the growth that we've had. So as more capital gets allocated here, and whether that, and I'm talking about it more on the investment side, when they're buying assets here, the more you do that, the more you're going to start seeing, okay, we need to go down there. You know, let's just open a satellite office. Let's do something. And if we have the education to support that, if we have the good businesses retaining that talent and continue to do what we're doing in the path that we're going through, I think you can go through the cycles a lot better than we do somewhere, let's say, kind of in the Midwest, where things are a little bit different, right? Because Miami's real estate market is different than what's up in North Carolina or the West Coast. So I think we just need to continue doing what we're doing on the local side and just continue improving. And I think the sky's the limit for Miami, for sure.
What a great panel, right? Because everyone here is thinking long term, and maybe that's the solution. Because as a real estate developer, we're always, 2 or 3 bad decisions away from boom and bust, right? So we lose a lot of sleep trying to make sure we're on the right side of that equation all the time. But generally, if you are thinking long term, that provides the stability. If you are a very short-term player, then you tend to work leverage in capital markets, the things that you're worrying about and cautioning us all about, right? And that's when I think you get more into that bust stage where people are overextended or they're making something work where it shouldn't work. But my mind is on this. I keep thinking about fundamentals. So 2013, the Sofer family had a number of hotels in Nashville, small hotels. And I remember looking at the numbers and they were just going like this. And it's a city that at that time people didn't want to be in. And, so everyone's texting and saying Happy New Year. And I'm saying, let's go buy stuff in Nashville, right? So 10 years later, we look smart, but it's because of the fundamentals. So now I look at the Aventura Mall, I look at our 4 rental buildings, I look at our commercial properties, and I'm saying the fundamentals are just really strong. People are spending, retailers are being smart, they're not at negative, at horrendous occupancy costs, they're actually making money. Luxury tenants are moving here and being successful. Buildings are of quality. People want to be smart about their funding, but they'll pay a little bit for something of quality. But the fact is the fundamentals are really, really good, and that gives me comfort. There are a lot of external influences. We talked capital markets. We joked backstage that we wouldn't talk about interest rates and things like that because it's crazy, isn't it? But those are all external stimulus. And here, to the extent that we can control some of those external stimulus issues in the governmental side, and we're thinking long term, it feels good to me.
Perfect. I greatly appreciate each and every one of you. I love Miami. I hope everyone here loves Miami. And it's going to be very, very, steady Steves, right? We're going to be in a good market. We're going to be good, right? Miami has withstood a lot of ups and downs. We rode the wave, and we're going to continue to be here. So again, thank you for your time and your commitment to FIU, and thank you, everyone, for your time.